Dr. Layla was once a celebrated plastic surgeon, known for her impeccable skills and innovative techniques. Her career was her pride, but it was her family that she cherished the most. Her husband, Robert, was the love of her life, a man whose presence brought joy and stability to their household. Together they had a son, Mark, who was the light of their lives. Layla's world was perfect, or so it seemed. The tranquility of her life was shattered one summer afternoon. It was a day like any other, filled with the promise of laughter and shared moments. Robert had decided to host a barbecue, a tradition in their family. Friends and relatives gathered in their backyard, the aroma of grilling meat mingling with the laughter of children playing nearby. Layla was inside preparing a salad when she heard the explosion. Rushing outside, she was greeted by a scene of chaos. The grill had exploded, engulfing Robert in flames. The next few moments were a blur of screams and frantic efforts to extinguish the fire. Layla's medical training kicked in, and she did everything she could to stabilize her husband before the paramedics arrived. But the damage was severe. Robert was rushed to the hospital with third-degree burns covering much of his body. Days turned into weeks as Robert fought for his life in the intensive care unit. Layla barely left his side, her heart breaking with each passing day. Despite the best efforts of the medical team, Robert's condition deteriorated. His burns were too extensive, and the risk of infection was high. Layla watched helplessly as the man she loved slipped away. The night he died, she held his hand and promised him she would find a way to help others avoid the same fate. The death of her husband left Layla devastated. She felt as if a part of her soul had been torn away. In her grief, she turned to her work with a renewed intensity. Her goal became clear: to develop a synthetic skin that could help burn victims like Robert. She believed that if she could create a skin that mimicked human tissue perfectly, it would revolutionize burn treatment and save countless lives. Layla's research consumed her. She spent long hours in the lab, often working through the night. Her colleagues admired her dedication, but they also noticed a change in her. She became more withdrawn, her once warm demeanor replaced by a steely determination. Layla was no longer driven by professional ambition alone. She was fueled by a personal vendetta against the fate that had taken her husband from her. Meanwhile, her son Mark was struggling to cope with his own grief. The loss of his father had hit him hard, and he found himself sinking into a deep depression. Layla, absorbed in her work, failed to notice the signs of his deteriorating mental health. Mark, who had once been a bright and cheerful boy, became withdrawn and sullen. He started skipping school and spending time with a new group of friends who introduced him to drugs. The drugs provided a temporary escape from his pain, but they also pulled him further into a downward spiral. Layla, blinded by her own sorrow and obsession, did not see what was happening until it was too late. One night, she received a call that every parent dreads. Mark had been found unconscious in his room, a syringe still in his arm. He was rushed to the hospital, but the overdose was fatal. Layla was once again faced with the unbearable pain of losing a loved one. The death of her son was a turning point for Layla. Her grief morphed into a burning rage. She blamed the drug dealer who had sold Mark the fatal dose, and she vowed to make him pay. Layla's quest for vengeance took over her life, intertwining with her research in a dark and twisted way. She tracked down the dealer, a man named Carlos, and kidnapped him, imprisoning him in her basement. Carlos would become her test subject, a living canvas for her experiments in synthetic skin. Layla's once noble quest to create a life-saving technology had taken a sinister turn. She justified her actions by telling herself that she was continuing her research, but in reality, she was exacting a personal vendetta. Carlos, terrified and helpless, became the unwilling participant in her experiments. Layla pushed the boundaries of medical ethics, subjecting him to painful procedures in her quest to perfect her creation. As she worked on Carlos, Layla's memories of Robert and Mark haunted her. She was driven by a need to make their deaths mean something, to find some semblance of justice in a world that had been so cruel to her. But with each experiment, she felt herself slipping further away from the woman she once was. Her colleagues, unaware of the horrors unfolding in her basement, continued to respect her professional achievements, but Layla knew she was walking a dangerous path. Layla's experiments on Carlos were brutal. She used various chemicals and grafting techniques to test the durability and elasticity of her synthetic skin. Each failure brought a new wave of frustration and anger. Carlos, who had once been a street-smart and confident dealer, was reduced to a broken shell of a man. The pain he endured was unimaginable, but Layla showed no mercy. She was relentless in her pursuit, convinced that she was on the verge of a breakthrough. As the months passed, Layla's obsession deepened. She barely slept, surviving on caffeine and adrenaline. Her appearance became gaunt and haggard, but she paid no attention to her own well-being. Her focus was solely on her experiments and the need to see them succeed. Carlos, now a permanent resident of her basement, was subjected to an unending cycle of tests and procedures. Layla's work did yield results. She developed a prototype of synthetic skin that showed promise. It was strong, flexible, and capable of integrating with human tissue in a way that previous attempts had not. But the cost of this progress weighed heavily on her. The ethical lines she had crossed, the lives she had destroyed in her pursuit of revenge, all haunted her. She knew that presenting her findings to the medical community would require careful deception to hide the true nature of her research. The day came when Layla was ready to reveal her breakthrough. She scheduled a presentation at a major medical conference, preparing to showcase her synthetic skin to the world. As she stood before her peers, she spoke with the passion and conviction of someone who had poured their soul into their work. The audience was captivated by her presentation, and the potential of her creation was undeniable. But beneath the applause and accolades, Layla felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. After the conference, Layla returned home to find Carlos barely clinging to life. The prolonged suffering and the inhumane conditions had taken their toll. In a moment of clarity, Layla realized the extent of her monstrosity. She had become the very thing she despised, a person driven by vengeance rather than compassion. The realization was a crushing blow, and she knew she could not continue down this path. Layla decided to free Carlos, but it was too late. His injuries were too severe, and he died in her basement. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, and she knew she had to face the consequences. Layla turned herself in to the authorities, confessing everything. Her trial was swift, and she was sentenced to prison for her crimes. In prison, Layla had time to reflect on her journey. She had set out to create something that would save lives, but her grief and anger had led her astray. Her story served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting personal pain drive professional pursuits. Layla's research was eventually continued by others, and her synthetic skin did become a valuable medical advancement. However, the legacy she left behind was tainted by the darkness of her actions. While incarcerated, Layla found a measure of peace. She participated in prison programs, helping other inmates and using her medical knowledge to assist with their care. It was a small way to atone for her past. The memory of Robert and Mark never left her, but she tried to honor them by making a positive impact, even from behind bars. Layla's story, though tragic, was a reminder of the importance of ethics and compassion in the pursuit of scientific progress. As the weeks turned into months, Mark's downward spiral continued. Layla was so engrossed in her research that she failed to notice the subtle changes in her son's behavior. His once vibrant eyes grew dull, and his laughter became a distant memory. Mark's friends, who were equally troubled, introduced him to harder drugs, each hit pulling him further from reality. His addiction deepened, becoming an insidious escape from the unbearable weight of his grief. One cold winter night, Layla returned home late from the lab. She had been working tirelessly on a new batch of synthetic skin samples, convinced that she was close to a breakthrough. The house was eerily quiet as she entered, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise in her mind. She found Mark slumped over his desk, his body limp and lifeless. The syringe next to him told the tragic story without words. Layla's scream pierced the silence, a raw and guttural sound born from the deepest pit of her despair. She tried to revive him, her hands shaking as she performed CPR. The paramedics arrived, their faces grim as they pronounced him dead. Her world, already fractured, shattered completely. The pain was excruciating, a relentless, searing agony that consumed her entirely. She was left alone in a dark abyss of sorrow, anger, and regret. In the weeks that followed, Layla became a shell of her former self. The once formidable surgeon was now a broken woman, her eyes hollow and haunted. She couldn't sleep. Nightmares of Mark's lifeless body haunted her every moment. Guilt gnawed at her insides, and she questioned every decision she had made. How had she not seen the signs? How had she let her son slip through her fingers? The anguish was unbearable, and her mind was a tumultuous storm of grief and self-recrimination. Amidst her suffering, a new emotion began to take root: rage. It started as a small burning ember, slowly growing into a roaring inferno. Layla directed her fury towards the person she held responsible for her son's death, the drug dealer who had supplied Mark. She obsessed over this shadowy figure, envisioning him lurking in dark alleyways, preying on vulnerable souls like her son. This man became the embodiment of all her pain and loss, a target for her burgeoning desire for revenge. Layla's need for vengeance consumed her thoughts, leaving little room for anything else. Her colleagues noticed her increasing absences and erratic behavior, but she offered no explanations. She spent her nights trawling through the dark corners of the internet, searching for any information that might lead her to the dealer. Her medical knowledge, once a tool for healing, became a weapon in her quest for retribution. Eventually, Layla discovered the identity of the man who had sold Mark the drugs. Carlos was a small-time dealer with a reputation for ruthlessness. Layla's heart raced as she gathered information about his whereabouts and routines. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was madness, but the pain and anger drowned out any voice of reason. She was determined to confront Carlos and make him pay for what he had done. Armed with a plan and fueled by her unrelenting fury, Layla prepared for the confrontation. She gathered supplies from her lab: syringes, sedatives, and various medical instruments. Her hands were steady, her mind focused like a laser. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about finding some semblance of control in a world that had become chaotic and unpredictable. Layla was ready to face the monster who had taken her son from her, and nothing would stand in her way. Layla's thirst for vengeance had become an all-consuming fire, burning away the remnants of her former self. Her once clear moral compass was now clouded by a singular desire to make Carlos suffer as she had suffered. She knew that capturing him would not be easy. He was cautious, always moving, and always wary of danger. But Layla's determination was unwavering. She began her preparations with the meticulousness of a surgeon planning a complex operation. Layla tapped into her medical knowledge to devise a plan that would ensure Carlos's capture. She obtained powerful sedatives and other drugs from the hospital, carefully selecting those that would incapacitate him without causing immediate harm. She rehearsed her actions repeatedly, ensuring that every step would be executed flawlessly. She couldn't afford any mistakes. This was her one chance to avenge Mark's death. The day came when Layla felt ready to put her plan into action. She had tracked Carlos to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. The area was known for its criminal activity, a place where people went to disappear. Layla's heart pounded in her chest as she watched him from her car, her mind racing with thoughts of what she was about to do. She waited until nightfall, when the streets were quiet and the shadows deep. Layla approached Carlos's room with silent steps, her breathing steady and controlled. She picked the lock with ease, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Inside, the room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Carlos was lying on the bed, his eyes closed, unaware of the danger creeping up on him. Layla moved swiftly, injecting him with the sedative before he could react. His eyes snapped open in shock, but it was too late. Within moments, he was unconscious. With Carlos immobilized, Layla set to work. She bound his hands and feet with zip ties, ensuring that he would be unable to escape when he awoke. She gagged him to muffle any sounds, then carried him to her car. The drive back to her house was a blur, her mind focused solely on the task at hand. She had transformed her basement into a makeshift lab, equipped with everything she needed for her experiments. As she dragged Carlos into the basement, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over her. She had him where she wanted him. She secured him to a metal chair, double-checking the restraints to make sure they were tight. When he finally began to stir, she was ready. She stood in front of him, her face a mask of cold resolve, and waited for him to fully awaken. When Carlos's eyes finally opened, they were filled with confusion and fear. He struggled against the restraints, his muffled cries echoing in the small basement. Layla watched him for a moment, letting him take in his surroundings. Then she removed the gag and spoke, her voice steady and emotionless. She told him who she was and why he was there. She recounted Mark's descent into addiction, his untimely death, and the pain that had consumed her ever since. Carlos's initial defiance crumbled as Layla detailed the suffering he had caused. He pleaded for mercy, but she was unmoved. Her heart had hardened, and there was no room for compassion. She began her experiments with a cold precision, her medical expertise ensuring that each procedure was executed flawlessly. She tested various compounds on his skin, noting the reactions with clinical detachment. Each scream and plea from Carlos only served to strengthen her resolve. Layla's basement became a chamber of horrors, a place where scientific inquiry and personal vengeance intertwined. She documented every step of her experiments, treating Carlos not as a human being, but as a test subject. The pain she inflicted was a means to an end, a necessary part of her quest to perfect her synthetic skin. She pushed the boundaries of medical ethics, driven by a need for retribution that overshadowed any sense of morality. As weeks turned into months, Layla's experiments yielded results. She developed a prototype of synthetic skin that showed promise, exhibiting qualities that surpassed previous iterations. The material was resilient and lifelike, a testament to her scientific prowess. But the cost of this progress weighed heavily on her. She knew that her methods were indefensible, that the pain she had caused was unjustifiable. Yet she couldn't bring herself to stop. Layla's colleagues remained oblivious to the horrors unfolding in her basement. They continued to respect her professional achievements, unaware of the dark secret she harbored. Her absences from the hospital grew more frequent and her behavior more erratic. Whispers of concern circulated among her peers, but no one suspected the true extent of her descent into darkness. Layla's life had become a grim routine. By day, she maintained a facade of normalcy, attending to her duties at the hospital with the same precision and skill that had earned her a stellar reputation. By night, she descended into the depths of her basement, where the boundaries between healer and tormentor blurred. Each session with Carlos was a step further into the abyss, his suffering a constant reminder of her own loss. Carlos's condition deteriorated rapidly. The once cocky and defiant dealer was now a broken man, his spirit crushed under the weight of Layla's relentless experiments. His body bore the marks of countless procedures, his skin a patchwork of wounds and scars. Layla observed these changes with a detached curiosity, her empathy buried beneath layers of rage and grief. She documented his reactions meticulously, treating him as both a subject of study and an instrument of her vengeance. Layla's synthetic skin prototype was nearing completion. She had refined the formula to a point where it mimicked human tissue almost perfectly. The material was strong, flexible, and capable of integrating seamlessly with living flesh. Each breakthrough brought a fleeting sense of accomplishment, but it was always overshadowed by the dark reality of how it was achieved. Layla's success was tainted by the suffering that had paved the way. The culmination of her work came one night when she successfully grafted a section of the synthetic skin onto Carlos's arm. The integration was flawless, the material bonding with his tissue in a way that previous versions had not. Layla felt a surge of triumph, tempered by a deep sense of unease. She had achieved what she set out to do, but the cost had been immense. As she looked at Carlos, unconscious and broken, she couldn't escape the haunting realization of what she had become. Despite her scientific success, Layla's inner turmoil grew. She began to experience vivid nightmares, scenes of her experiments replaying in her mind with horrific clarity. She saw Mark's face superimposed over Carlos's, his eyes filled with accusation. Sleep became elusive, her waking hours dominated by an overwhelming sense of guilt. The walls of her basement seemed to close in on her, the air thick with the ghosts of her actions. Layla's mental state deteriorated further. She became increasingly paranoid, convinced that her colleagues were starting to suspect something was amiss. She took greater care to cover her tracks, erasing any evidence of her nighttime activities. But the strain was evident. Her performance at the hospital suffered, her once sharp mind dulled by exhaustion and stress. She lashed out at colleagues without provocation, her temper flaring unpredictably. Her behavior did not go unnoticed. Dr. Harris, a senior surgeon and mentor, expressed concern over her erratic conduct. He approached her one afternoon, his voice gentle but firm. He spoke of the changes he had observed, the absences, the uncharacteristic outbursts. He urged her to take a leave of absence, to seek help. Layla listened in silence, her mind racing. She knew that any further scrutiny could unravel her carefully constructed facade. Layla agreed to take a short leave, hoping it would placate her colleagues and give her time to think. She spent those days in a haze of anxiety and fear, unable to escape the gravity of her situation. She avoided the basement, the sight of it now too much to bear. Instead, she wandered the empty rooms of her house, haunted by memories of better times. The silence was oppressive, each creak and groan of the old house amplifying her sense of isolation. One evening, as she sat in Mark's room, surrounded by his belongings, Layla made a decision. She could no longer continue on this path. The weight of her actions was crushing her, and she knew that she had to face the consequences. She went to the basement one last time, standing over Carlos's frail and battered body. She spoke to him, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger, sorrow, and regret. She told him about Mark, about the pain that had driven her to this point. Carlos listened in silence, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and understanding. He knew that his fate was sealed, that there was no escape from the nightmare that had become his reality. Layla's words were a confession, a plea for forgiveness that she knew she did not deserve. As she spoke, she felt a strange sense of release, as if unburdening herself of the truth was the first step towards redemption. Layla administered a series of injections to ease Carlos's pain. She untied him from the chair and laid him on a cot, covering him with a blanket. She watched over him as he slipped into unconsciousness, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what she had done. When he finally passed away, she felt a profound sense of loss, but also a glimmer of peace. The man who had caused her so much pain was gone, and with him, the focus of her hatred. Layla's journey into darkness had left her standing at the edge of an ethical abyss. The decisions she had made, the actions she had taken, were irreversible. She knew that she had to face the consequences of her choices, both legally and morally. The morning after Carlos's death, she called the authorities and confessed everything. She was arrested and charged with kidnapping, torture, and a litany of other crimes. The trial was swift and publicized, the media seizing on the shocking story of a respected surgeon turned vengeful torturer. Layla stood before the court, her face a mask of resignation. She offered no defense, no justification for her actions. The evidence was overwhelming, her detailed notes and recordings a stark testament to her descent into madness. The jury deliberated for only a short time before returning a guilty verdict. Layla was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The once revered surgeon was now an inmate, her life confined to the stark realities of the penitentiary system. Her story became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the dangers of letting grief and anger dictate one's actions. In prison, Layla found herself with ample time to reflect on her journey, to grapple with the enormity of her crimes. Despite the harsh conditions of her new reality, Layla sought to find some measure of redemption. She used her medical knowledge to assist the prison infirmary, tending to the health needs of her fellow inmates. It was a small way to atone for her past, to find some semblance of purpose amidst the wreckage of her life. She kept to herself, her interactions with others limited, her focus solely on her work and her thoughts. Layla's research on synthetic skin, though born of unethical practices, did not go to waste. Other scientists picked up where she had left off, refining and improving her work. The material she had developed showed great promise in clinical trials, offering new hope for burn victims and others with severe skin injuries. Layla followed these developments from afar, a bittersweet reminder of the potential her work held, tainted by the methods she had employed. Her time in prison was marked by an internal struggle, a constant battle between self-loathing and the desire for forgiveness. She corresponded with a few trusted colleagues, sharing insights and updates on the progress of her research. These letters were her lifeline, a connection to the world she had once been a part of. They provided a semblance of normalcy, a reminder of the person she had once been. Layla's nightmares persisted, the faces of Mark and Carlos haunting her dreams. She would wake in a cold sweat, the weight of her guilt pressing down on her. In those dark moments, she found herself questioning everything, her decisions, her motivations, her very identity. She knew that forgiveness, if it ever came, would be hard-earned and perhaps undeserved. But she continued to strive for it, seeking to find some measure of peace. In her quieter moments, Layla thought often of Robert and Mark. She kept their photographs by her bed, a daily reminder of the love she had lost and the pain that had driven her to such extremes. She wrote letters to them, pouring out her heart in words that would never be read. These letters were her way of maintaining a connection, of seeking solace in the memories of the life they had shared. The years passed slowly, each day in prison a repetition of the one before. Layla aged, her once sharp features softening, her hair turning grey. She remained dedicated to her work in the infirmary, her skills earning her the respect of the prison staff and her fellow inmates. She found a sense of community in this harsh environment, a stark contrast to the isolation she had imposed on herself before her arrest. Layla's story, though tragic, served as a stark warning to those who might follow a similar path. It was a tale of loss, anger, and the devastating consequences of unchecked vengeance. It was also a story of redemption, of a woman seeking to find meaning in the aftermath of her actions. As she navigated the complexities of her new reality, Layla continued to grapple with the ethical abyss she had once stood at the edge of, seeking to find a way back to the light. In the sterile and controlled environment of the prison infirmary, Layla found herself performing routine tasks, treating minor injuries, administering medications, and providing comfort to her fellow inmates. This work offered her a semblance of the life she once led, but it was in these mundane activities that she often found her thoughts drifting back to the ethical quagmire of her past actions. It was during one of these routine days that she was unexpectedly confronted by someone from her past. Dr. Harris, her former mentor and the man who had once tried to steer her back from the brink, appeared in the visiting area of the prison. His presence was a jolt to Layla, a stark reminder of the world she had left behind. He had come not just out of professional curiosity, but with a deeply personal concern. The two sat across from each other, separated by a thick pane of glass, and spoke through the phone receivers. "Layla, Doctor," Harris began, his voice a mixture of sorrow and reproach. "I've been following your case closely. I needed to see for myself how you're holding up." Layla looked at him, her eyes weary but still carrying a glint of the sharp intelligence he remembered. "It's been, difficult," she replied, "but I'm trying to make amends in the only way I know how." "Doctor," Harris sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to dispel a headache, "you were one of the brightest minds I've ever worked with. It's tragic to see how far you've fallen. But I didn't come here to lecture you, Layla. I came to understand, why did you let it go this far?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Layla took a deep breath, struggling to articulate the complex web of emotions and motivations that had driven her actions. "I lost myself in the grief, in the anger. I thought I could channel it into something good, but it consumed me instead. I crossed lines I never thought I would, and I can't undo that." "Doctor," Harris nodded, his expression a mix of empathy and disappointment. "We all face our demons, Layla. Some of us are just better at hiding them. But you have to live with what you've done, and you need to find a way to forgive yourself, if not for your sake, then for the memory of those you lost." Their conversation was interrupted by the buzz of the guards signaling the end of visiting hours. As Layla stood to leave, "Doctor," Harris called out to her one last time, "there's still a chance for you to make a difference, even here. Don't let your story end in darkness." Layla returned to her cell, "Doctor," Harris's words echoing in her mind. She knew he was right, but the path to self-forgiveness seemed insurmountably steep. She lay on her bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, grappling with the duality of her nature, the healer and the destroyer, both facets of a fractured soul. In the weeks that followed, Layla devoted herself even more fervently to her work in the infirmary. She treated each inmate with a level of care and compassion that went beyond mere duty. This was her way of seeking atonement, of trying to bring some light into the lives of those around her. Every bandaged wound, every kind word, was a small step towards redemption. Layla's presence in the infirmary became a stabilizing force. She developed a rapport with the inmates, many of whom had never experienced such genuine care. Her reputation spread, and soon even the most hardened prisoners began to seek her out, not just for medical treatment, but for advice and support. She listened to their stories, offering what comfort she could, and in doing so, she found a measure of peace. One inmate, Maria, became particularly close to Layla. Maria was a young woman serving time for drug-related offenses, her life a mirror of the path Mark had taken. Seeing the parallels, Layla felt a deep personal connection to Maria's plight. She took the young woman under her wing, mentoring her and helping her navigate the challenges of prison life. "Why do you care so much?" Maria asked one day, her eyes searching Layla's face for answers. Layla hesitated, then spoke with a vulnerability she rarely showed. "I see in you what I failed to see in my own son. If I can help you, maybe I can find some forgiveness for myself." Maria's eyes softened with understanding. "Thank you, Layla, for everything." Through her interactions with Maria and others, Layla began to see the impact of her actions in a new light. She realized that while she could never undo the past, she could still influence the present and future. This understanding brought her a sense of purpose that she had lost for so long. Layla also started writing again, this time focusing on her experiences in prison and the lessons she had learned. Her writings were raw and honest, detailing her journey from respected surgeon to vengeful torturer, and finally to a woman seeking redemption. These reflections were a cathartic release, a way for her to process her emotions and come to terms with her past. Her writings eventually caught the attention of a prison reform advocacy group. They reached out to her, interested in sharing her story as a powerful example of personal transformation and the need for compassionate approaches to criminal justice. Layla was hesitant at first, but she realized that this could be a way to contribute positively to society, even from within the confines of her prison cell. The advocacy group published excerpts from Layla's writings, and her story resonated with many. She received letters from people who had read her words and found inspiration in her journey. These messages of support and understanding provided her with a sense of connection to the outside world, a reminder that her life still held value and meaning. Layla continued to write, each word a step towards healing. She chronicled her daily life in prison, her interactions with inmates, and her ongoing struggle for self-forgiveness. These writings became a lifeline, a way for her to make sense of her existence and to offer hope to others who might be facing their own battles. Layla's work in the infirmary and her writing brought her a renewed sense of purpose, but her journey was far from over. Each day was a challenge, a test of her resolve to find redemption and to live a life that honored the memory of those she had lost. She continued to mentor Maria, who was making significant progress in overcoming her addiction and preparing for life after prison. One day, Maria approached Layla with a proposal. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice filled with determination. "When I get out of here, I want to start a program to help others like me, people who fell into addiction and ended up in prison. We could offer support, education, and resources to help them rebuild their lives." Layla felt a surge of pride and hope. "That's a wonderful idea, Maria. And I would be honored to help you in any way I can." Together, they began to outline the framework for the program, leveraging Layla's medical knowledge and Maria's lived experience. They corresponded with organizations outside the prison, laying the groundwork for what would become a beacon of hope for many. This project gave Layla a sense of forward momentum, a way to channel her skills and experiences into something that could make a real difference. Layla's relationship with Dr. Harris also evolved. He continued to visit her, and their conversations deepened. They discussed medical ethics, personal accountability, and the complexities of human nature. Dr. Harris's guidance helped Layla navigate her inner turmoil and reinforced her commitment to her path of atonement. "You're doing good work here, Layla," Dr. Harris said during one of his visits. "It's never too late to make a positive impact." Layla nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. "Thank you, Dr. Harris. Your belief in me means more than I can say." The program Maria envisioned started to take shape, with support from the advocacy group and other interested parties. Layla and Maria's collaboration became a source of inspiration for other inmates, showing that even in the darkest of places, hope and transformation were possible. The initiative, aptly named Second Chance, aimed to provide comprehensive support for individuals transitioning from prison back into society. Layla's contributions to the program extended beyond her incarceration. She provided medical insights, helped design educational modules, and even offered counseling sessions via video calls. Her involvement kept her connected to a larger purpose and allowed her to witness the positive changes in the lives of those she helped. As the years passed, Layla's life in prison became a testament to resilience and redemption. Her story continued to inspire others, both inside and outside the prison walls. She received numerous letters from former inmates who had benefited from the Second Chance program, each one a reminder of the far-reaching impact of her efforts. Layla's writings were eventually compiled into a book, Reflections from the Abyss, which became a poignant exploration of her journey. The book was well received, praised for its honesty and the depth of its insights into the human condition. It served as a powerful narrative of loss, redemption, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Through her work, both in the infirmary and through the Second Chance program, Layla found a measure of peace. She knew that she could never fully atone for the pain she had caused, but she also understood that her actions could still bring about positive change. She continued to strive for forgiveness, both from herself and from those she had wronged. Layla's journey was a continuous process of growth and learning. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities for reflection. She embraced her role as a mentor and advocate, using her experiences to guide others towards a better future. Her life, once defined by tragedy and vengeance, had transformed into a narrative of hope and resilience. In the end, Layla's story was one of profound transformation. She had navigated the darkest depths of her soul and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. Her legacy was not just the synthetic skin she had developed, but the lives she had touched and the positive impact she had made. She continued her journey, one step at a time, ever mindful of the lessons she had learned along the way. Layla's journey from a celebrated surgeon to a vengeful captor illustrates the devastating effects of unchecked grief and anger. Her story serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of ethical boundaries and the potential for redemption, even in the darkest of circumstances. Ultimately, Layla's quest for atonement through her work in prison and her contributions to the Second Chance program highlight the enduring strength of the human spirit. Though she can never undo the past, her efforts to bring hope and healing to others offer a glimpse of light in an otherwise tragic tale. If you found Layla's story as compelling as we did, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts on her journey. Leave a comment below.